Week 16 is officially here, and it is fantasy football semifinals time. One more win, and you have the opportunity next week to go on the grand stage, to go win your fantasy football championship. One more win to get that top 2 spot locked down, and I got you covered with my top 36 wide receivers in the tier list format I bring you guys every week, going through my wide receiver 1s, my wide receiver 2s, my wide receiver 3s, and my favorite flex plays entering week 16 of fantasy football. Like I said, it is crunch time. There is no next week if you do not win this week. This week is the most important week of the year. So let's go and win those games. But before we go on to the wide receiver 1s, we go to the will they play tier. And there's 2 total names on this list. A guy that's already been ruled out and a guy that is questionable at this point, although he is trending on going out. As we know, with George Pickens ruled out with that hamstring injury that he's been dealing with. It is unfortunate, though, if you do win this week. Hopefully he is able to return for fantasy football championships. And then Jalen Waddle, again, I expect him to fully be out. It does appear he suffered a knee sprain in last week's game. He is listed as doubtful. Doesn't appear like he's going to be playing. So if you have Jalen Waddle, make sure you have a strong pivot option. But now we go to the official top 12. Again, the most important wide receiver rankings list to date. We have at number 1, the number 1 all year, Jamar Chase of the Cincinnati Bengals, 27.25 implied Bengals points at home against the Cleveland Browns this week. And it's really simple with Jamar Chase. I mean, after a down week of Jamar Chase consisting of 18.4 PPR points, he gets a smash game environment against Cleveland, over 27 implied points like I mentioned at the top. And he got you here for a reason. The guy is one of the single positional advantages in fantasy this year. 38 targets in his last 3 games. Joe Burrow playing at an MVP level. Chase averaging over 24 PPR points per game. It would be malpractice to have any other name at number 1 than Jamar Chase of the Cincinnati Bengals. But we move on to my wide receivers 2 and 11. Puka Nacua of the Los Angeles Rams and Davante Adams of the New York Jets. 24.75 implied Rams points here. 21.75 implied Jets points. And starting with Puka, since his return in week 8, he's been averaging 20.2 PPR points per game and has commanded a 31% target share in this Rams offense. The Rams have won 6 of their last 8 games. Matthew Stafford in that stretch, 16 touchdown passes, and Puka is an alpha wide receiver 1. Top 5 level offense, great insulation with the implied total. I mean, there's not many better projections in fantasy football period right now than what Puka Nacua brings to the table. And outside of Jamar Chase, he is the cleanest wide receiver projection in fantasy football at this point. On the flip side with Davante Adams, it's about time I finally rank these Jets pass catchers accordingly. I've been having Garrett Wilson as the 1 here, but when you do look at the split once Davante Adams became a Jet, it would be malpractice for me to continue ranking Wilson over him. This tweet here by Ron Stewart, since the Davante Adams trade in week 7, Davante Adams, 81 targets, 18.3 PPR points, whereas with Garrett Wilson, 67 targets, 14.6 PPR points per game. So again, I love Garrett Wilson. I'll talk about him in a little bit. But like I said, with how Davante Adams has been playing, I need to be ranking him as the 1 out of this group. He's coming off that big monster game. Jets are eliminated from the playoffs, and I suspect a ton of buddy ball between him and Aaron Rodgers moving forward. But moving on to wide receivers 3 and 10 respectively. At wide receiver 3, we have Justin Jefferson of the Minnesota Vikings. At wide receiver 10, we have Jackson Smith and Jigba of the Seattle Seahawks. 23.25 implied Vikings points in this game, 20.25 for the Seahawks at home this week. And starting with Justin Jefferson, after that cold stretch of not scoring in 6 straight games, he has returned to elite status, 3 touchdowns in his last 2 games, and there's more meat left on the bone for Justin Jefferson. If you guys did watch that game on Monday Night Football, he dropped a walk-in against the Chicago Bears, and he also was tackled at the 1-yard line on another one of his receptions. With Justin Jefferson, again, we know he's an elite wide receiver, top 3 level wide receiver talent in the league. And with the way Sam Darnold has been playing, he has been supporting a high-flying passing offense for the Vikings. Jefferson's finally realized his touchdown equity, and I think he has cemented himself as a top 3 option moving forward. And on the flip side with Jackson Smith and Jigba, he has been unbelievable as of late. Since week 9, this guy is averaging 21.4 PPR points per game, and he has been incredibly consistent working that slot role for Seattle. He's clearly established himself as the wide receiver 1 there over DK Metcalf and faces a pass funnel Vikings defense this week. For JSN, 70-plus yards in every game since week 9, and he looks like that JSN we thought in his sophomore year coming out of Ohio State. But moving on to another pair of wide receivers, we have the Sunday night football game. Obviously, myself, a Cowboys fan, my co-host Corey being the Tampa Bay Buccaneers fan. For me, I got CeeDee Lamb coming in at wide receiver 4 and Mike Evans coming in as my wide receiver 7 this week. And as we know, both of these guys are alpha wide receiver 1s for the respective teams. I will start off with CeeDee Lamb, obviously top 10 matchup going up against Tampa Bay. And with CeeDee Lamb, he's been averaging 18.9 PPR points per game since the Cowboys bye week. Top 15 weekly wide receiver in 5 of those 8 games. And he has a 31% target share down that stretch. And he currently leads the NFL in targets on the year. While he's not quite, last year's CeeDee Lamb, down the stretch last year, CeeDee Lamb giving you 27 PPR points per game. 18.9 is strong wide receiver 1 numbers. And even without Dak Prescott active, we have seen CeeDee Lamb return high-end wide receiver 1 numbers. On the flip side with Big Mike Evans, 21.4 PPR points per game in his last 4 since returning from that hamstring injury. And he is on the road to 1,000 receiving yards, 251 receiving yards off of 1,000 so far with 3 games left. I think that Tampa does everything in their power to get him over that number. Not to mention, again, we know with Big Mike, the size he brings, the X-ability on the boundary that he brings. 3 touchdowns in his last 4 games, 26.25 implied points, touchdown equity, yardage equity on this team. Mike Evans very well deserves mid-end wide receiver 1 status. But coming in at wide receiver 5, we have Nico Collins of the Houston Texans. Houston traveling on the road to play the Kansas City Chiefs this week. 19 implied Texans points. And despite a game where CJ Stroud really struggled to get it going, only 131 passing yards in that game, Nico got there on the back of his touchdowns, 2 receiving touchdowns in that game against Miami to make up for his lowest yardage output of the year. It is a tough matchup against KC. They are very stingy against opposing wide receivers. But with Nico Collins, he's an alpha wide receiver 1, one of the most consistently used wide receivers in the NFL. And as we know, the size, the speed, the ability to come down on the boundary with those 50-50 balls. If CJ Stroud can bounce back this week, I think Nico Collins has the opportunity to be the wide receiver 1 overall. Next up at wide receiver 6, we have Amon-Ra St. Brown of the Detroit Lions, 27.25 implied Lions points on the road going to play the Chicago Bears this week. And it's funny because the moment I point out Amon-Ra St. Brown last week, lessened target share, lessened overall volume in this Detroit passing offense, we finally see a trailing script for the Lions against Buffalo. And now with tone setter David Montgomery out of the lineup, I really do feel like we can see them potentially even lean on the pass more moving forward. With Amon-Ra St. Brown, monster game, 18 targets on those 59 Goff passing attempts. And while we won't get 59 pass attempts every week, we have seen Goff throw over 40 pass attempts in each of his last 2 games. And like I said, without David Montgomery on the field, they will need to inherently throw the football more, which will only increase the likelihood of Amon-Ra St. Brown being a league winner down the stretch. Again, he hasn't been that 20-point per game guy that he was the majority of last year, but with David Montgomery out of the lineup, we could potentially see him be a 20-point per game guy in the final 2 weeks of the year. Next up at wide receiver 8, we have A.J. Brown of the Philadelphia Eagles, 24.25 implied Eagles points on the road against Washington this week, and wholly positive regression for A.J. Brown this past week. 11 targets, 8 receptions, 110 receiving yards, and a receiving touchdown in that game. A.J. Brown was all the way back. And with the Eagles implied for nearly 25 points on the road, it's extremely exciting if you do have A.J. Brown. On top of that, we did see a return of the Eagles passing volume this past week. 32 pass attempts in this past week's game, whereas like I cited in last week's video, they were only averaging 25.2 across the year and hadn't gone over 30 since week 3. So for A.J. Brown, again, we know he's a superstar player. We know he's tethered to a near 25 implied point offense. And if we're starting to see this level of passing volume in the final 2 weeks, I think A.J. Brown can break fantasy. Next up at wide receiver 9, we have Drake London of the Atlanta Falcons, 25.25 implied Falcons points hosting the New York Giants this week. And with Drake London, again, we've known what he's represented. He's been a target magnet all year, but we're finally seeing a much needed change at the quarterback position. Simply put, Kirk Cousins has not played well enough in these last few games. In his last 5 games, Kirk Cousins has only thrown 1 passing touchdown to 9 interceptions. And with Michael Penix coming in as the new starting quarterback, I think there's a ton of upside for Drake London. I think the ultimate ceiling, again, very, very good matchup, could be similar to what Puka Nacua has been in that Rams offense. And then finally, closing off my wide receiver ones at 12 this week, we have Tyreek Hill of the Miami Dolphins, 23 implied Dolphins points at home against San Francisco. And this past week was not fun if you had Tyreek Hill in your lineup. Tua struggled mightily against Houston, but I do think he could bounce back in a big way. Prior to that Houston game between weeks 8 and 14, Tua was playing some of the best ball of his career, and Tyreek Hill prior to last week's game had 2 straight 20-plus PPR point performances. With Tyreek Hill, 30 targets in his last 3 games. We know the Dolphins can't run the ball for the life of them, and we have seen Tua have a ton of passing volume since returning. But you guys knew to start these guys at the top, so now I will spend some more time focusing on wide receivers 13 to 36. If you guys want access to our final 2 weeks of rankings, as well as all of the content we have planned in this Dynasty offseason, go over to flockfantasy.com. If you guys use promo code FSC, you will get 30% off any site-wide package, as well as a 7-day free trial over on Flock Fantasy. Again, the number one tool, the number one website to bettering yourself as a fantasy football player. Obviously, the redraft season, we're tailing off to the end now. But if you guys are avid Dynasty fantasy football players, make sure you check out all of the benefits we have over on Flock Fantasy. But starting off my wide receiver 2s at wide receiver 13 this week, we have Brian Thomas Jr. of the Jacksonville Jaguars, and I understand it. Only 19.5 implied Jaguars points going up against a crummy Raiders defense. This is not a good situation for what he has to deal with this game environment in this Jags offense. Obviously, we know Trevor Lawrence is out, Mac Jones is in, but Brian Thomas Jr., man, he is right on the cusp of being a superstar level player. In fact, as Matt Harmon tweets out, he may very well already be in that territory. He's been playing like a top 10 overall wide receiver in the NFL, and as of late, potentially a top 5 overall wide receiver. Matt Harmon, as you guys can see tweeted out here, weeks 13 to 15, 31.3% target share, 44.6% air yard share, target on 30% of his routes, 2.23 yards per route run, and 7.5 yards after catch per reception. The way he's been playing, like I said, looking like a superstar player. We're getting a guy that has been averaging 23.26 PPR points per game with Mac Jones as his starting quarterback. I'm not fading Brian Thomas Jr. He's way too talented. He's way too good with the ball in his hands. He's got the size. He's got the speed. I get it, man. The offense is not great to support, but at the same time, if he had a good offense, man, we'd be talking him up there with the Nico Collinses, with the Justin Jeffersons. That is the level of talent that I think Brian Thomas Jr. represents, and I am not fading him anywhere past the high-end wide receiver 2's territory. Wide receiver 14 for me is T. Higgins of the Cincinnati Bengals. By the time I'm recording this, it does appear that he's going to be playing. Zach Taylor was asked about T. Higgins' status, and he basically confirmed there will be no limitations to his workload this week, which is exactly what we want to hear if we do have T. Higgins in fantasy football, because with T. Higgins, man, he's been an absolute dominant force when he's been healthy this season. 17 PPR points per game. Despite a down game against the Cowboys just a couple weeks ago, he bounced back in a big way versus the Tennessee Titans. Over 27 implied Bengals points, backs against the wall, playoff lives on the line. I think Cincinnati relies upon that passing game. Top 5 matchup for wide receivers this year. And there's no passing offense in the NFL I currently trust more than the Cincinnati Bengals. But moving on to my wide receivers 15 and 18, they actually already played on Thursday Night Football. Cortland Sutton of the Denver Broncos, Ladd McConkey of the LA Chargers. For Sutton, 6 targets, 5 receptions, 50 receiving yards, 10 PPR points. For Ladd McConkey in this game, 6 targets, 6 receptions, 87 receiving yards, and 14.7 PPR points. So again, not the overall ceiling outcome we would have wanted for either of these guys, but at the same time, they will not kill your lineup with those totals. But sandwiched between Sutton and Ladd McConkey, I had ranked at 16 and 17, Garrett Wilson of the New York Jets and Cooper Kupp of the LA Rams. For Garrett Wilson, 21.75 implied Jets points. For Cooper Kupp, 24.75 implied Rams points in this game. With these guys, obviously, I already talked about the ones on their team there with Puka Nacua and Devontae Adams, but I really do love the projection of both Wilson and Kupp as well. 2 of the premier 2s in the NFL at this current point. I will start with Garrett Wilson. Yes, Adams has outperformed him as of late, but outside of last week's Adams blow-up, their totals have been pretty neck and neck throughout that stretch. While he hasn't been the wide receiver 1 king that I expected coming into the season, he has a very favorable matchup against an exploitable Rams defense, and this is one of the higher over-unders of the entire slate. On the flip side with Cooper Kupp, he has a more difficult matchup going up against the Jets and is coming off a goose egg in his last game against San Francisco. However, I do think that game was an anomaly. This has been a guy who's literally been a wide receiver 1 in PPR points per game throughout the year, and this is a high implied total. 15 plus PPR points in 7 of his 10 games played this year. I think he bounces back in a big way. Again, I can't rank him in the wide receiver 1 territory because there is risk level. 2 of his 3 worst games of the year have actually come in his last 3 weeks, but I do trust Cooper Kupp to bounce back. But moving on to the low end wide receiver 2s, we start off with Terry McLaurin of the Washington Commanders coming in at 19, 21 implied Commanders points at home against Philadelphia, and Terry McLaurin has been on fire in his last 3 games. 5 touchdowns in that stretch, over 20 PPR points in each of those games, but I do have a bit of concern in terms of ranking him higher than at 19 this week. For starters, I mean, this is a terrible matchup going up against Philadelphia, and this is the same Philadelphia defense that Terry mustered only 1 reception for 10 receiving yards just a few weeks ago. Again, tough matchup. I still can't fade a receiver that has the amount of touchdown equity that Terry McLaurin does. I do think the matchup limits him to more of a mid-end wide receiver 2 rather than the top 12 to 15 option he's been throughout the year. Coming out wide receiver 20, a guy that I want to rank higher, but I simply can't given the offensive projection. We have Malik Neighbors of the New York Giants, 16.25 implied Giants points on the road against Atlanta this week. And Drew Lock, while he is expected to make the return as the Giants starting quarterback, like I said, Vegas is not expecting much from this offense. 16.25 implied points is simply not a good enough offensive game environment. However, with Malik Neighbors, the way he bucks the trend is based off ridiculous usage. 37 targets in his last 3 games, nearly 11.7 targets per game across the year, and he is one of the safest weekly projections given the volume. I just do have concerns in terms of the overall ceiling that he represents. Only 1 touchdown in his last 8 games, and only 1 from a non-Daniel Jones quarterback this season. But next up at wide receiver 21, we have Jordan Addison of the Minnesota Vikings, 23.25 implied Vikings points, traveling on the road to play the Seattle Seahawks this week. With Jordan Addison, 44 targets, 29% target share, and 21.5 PPR points per game in his last 5 games. And Minnesota is implied, like I said, for over 23 points in this matchup. As we know with Jordan Addison, he has the type of weekly ceiling we want in a win-or-go-home situation. Darnold's been great. Addison's played his best ball of his season, and I do think he has another potential spike week against Seattle incoming. Next up at wide receiver 22, we have DJ Moore of the Chicago Bears, 20.75 implied Bears points hosting the Detroit Lions. And with DJ Moore, he has commanded 32 targets in his last 3 games, and while it has been a season of ups and downs, he has been a wide receiver 2 across the large sample of the year. And as Aaron Schatz points out here, Detroit's defense has simply fallen off a cliff as of late, validly so given the numerous injuries they have on that front. But as we see, they were a top 3 defense in DVOA between weeks 1 to 11. In these last 4 weeks, weeks 12 to 15, they have been a bottom 8 defense in football. So with this matchup, second highest over under the slate. Obviously, we saw a couple weeks ago DJ Moore 23.7 points against the same Lions defense, and I do think he has a potential another big game in store. But moving on to wide receiver 23, we have Jacoby Myers of the Las Vegas Raiders, 20.5 implied Raiders points hosting the Jacksonville Jaguars this week. With Jacoby Myers, 9.7 targets per game since week 3, and Aiden O'Connell is expected to make his return to the starting lineup. Myers has been great. Smash matchup going up against Jacksonville. This is a great spot for Jacoby Myers. Jacksonville's been a top 5 matchup for opposing wide receivers this year, and the Raiders' targets have been extremely consolidated between Jacoby Myers and Brock Bowers. Raiders, yes, they are implied for a low total at home, but the sheer volume that Jacoby Myers will see in this game, along with Aiden O'Connell attempting 35-plus pass attempts in each of his 2 starts he's made this year, makes it an extremely appealing spot for Jacoby Myers, a wide receiver 2 all season, and I think he stays that way this week. Coming out wide receiver 24, we have Jawan Jennings of the San Francisco 49ers, 21.5 implied Niners points going on the road to play Miami this week. And it's clear that Vegas still believes in this Niners offense with that respectable implied total on the road this week. Jennings has been an alpha, 51 targets in these last 6 games. However, me personally, I do have more pause with this Niners offense, and the Dolphins do represent a run funnel matchup while being stingy against the pass this season. However, with the injuries that this team has at running back, Isaac Guerrero not practicing this week. As we know, Jordan Mason, Christian McCaffrey both being IR. Maybe the Niners just simply don't have a choice. Maybe they can't go out there and establish the run in a run funnel matchup, because is Patrick Taylor going to handle the ball 20 to 25 times in this game? Or are the 49ers going to rely upon their soon-to-be $55+ million quarterback? But moving on to my wide receiver 3s at 25 this week, I have Devonta Smith of the Philadelphia Eagles. We finally saw Devonta Smith return in a big way this past week with Philadelphia throwing the ball more. And if that is the type of volume we can expect moving forward, we could see Smitty return all the way back. That's an extremely consolidated target share, and Smitty looks like the healthiest he has been all season. Washington's played better versus the pass, but Philly looks like arguably the best team in the NFL right now. Next up at wide receiver 26, we have Jerry Jeudy of the Cleveland Browns, 19.75 implied Browns points going on the road to play Cincinnati this week. And you can make the argument that this is too low based off how good Jerry Jeudy has been as of late, but I do have a bit of hesitance with the change at quarterback this week. Jameis Winston has been great for fantasy, 40+ passing attempts per game. being able to throw the ball into tight coverage, I do have a little bit more concern when it comes to Dorian Thompson-Robinson. However, even despite the quarterback concern, the Bengals are an extremely friendly matchup for wide receivers this year, and Jerry Jeudy could be a big-time volume target. David Njoku's missed all week of practice, and Cedric Tillman is still practicing in limited capacity. If both those guys are out, we could see Jerry Jeudy command 10-plus targets yet again. But then moving on to the other wide receivers from that Lions-Bears matchup, we have at 27 Jameson Williams, we have at 28 Keenan Allen. And obviously, we love this game environment, and we love the recent volume that we have seen for both of these players. Since returning from injury in Week 10, we have seen Jameson Williams be a much more consistent involvement piece for this Lions offense. And like I mentioned with the David Montgomery injury, we could even see more volume funnel through the passing game moving forward. For Jameson Williams, 38 targets in his 6 games since returning and 13 PPR points per game in that stretch. And that consistent involvement has resulted in a much higher floor for Jameson Williams while still possessing that big time ceiling he has. The 4.2 speed on the outside, the big plays he brings to this offense is being met with more volume overall. On the flip side for Keenan Allen, he's almost the anti-Jameson Williams in the sense that, sure, does he run a 4.2? Does he play on the boundary? No, but what Keenan Allen does so well is soak up targets. And for Keenan Allen, he scored 20-plus PPR points in 3 of his last 4 games and has 4 touchdowns in that stretch. He scored 2 touchdowns in the last meeting against the Lions on Thanksgiving, and I expect this game to be the highest scoring of the week, given how strong that Lions offense is and given how weakened their defense is moving forward. Keenan Allen, like I said, soaking targets, and I expect a ton of volume to come to him from Caleb Williams this week. Wide receiver 29 for me is Zay Flowers of the Baltimore Ravens, 26 implied Ravens points at home against Pittsburgh this week. And I do have some concerns for Zay Flowers going up against a tough match, no-nonsense Steelers defense that wants to rebound after that loss against Philadelphia. However, Zay Flowers is too talented of a player, tethered to too high of a total of an offense with the Baltimore Ravens this week. And as we know, he can get there in multiple ways, through the yak game, working down the field. And I do think this is a potential get-right spot for Zay in this offense. And then finally, coming in at 30, we have Calvin Ridley of the Tennessee Titans, 19.25 implied Titans points on the road against Indianapolis. And there is a quarterback change in-house for Tennessee. Will Levis obviously being benched for Mason Rudolph this week. And Calvin Ridley has been an absolute target alpha for this team. Indy is a good matchup despite a bad box score for Calvin Ridley the last time they played. He did have 8 targets in that game. And in the 3 games that Mason Rudolph started this year, Calvin Ridley had 32 targets and 14.36 PPR points per game. So again, it is a little bit concerning. He has been inconsistent all year, but we do have a sample size of him performing well with Mason Rudolph under center. But moving on to my flex plays, and I hate to be talking about this guy in this type of area, but the way DK Metcalf has been playing as of late, he deserves a spot in the flex play territory, coming in as my wide receiver 31 this week. And I already talked about his teammate JSN. At what point it was a real discussion. Who do I rank higher on a week-to-week basis? DK Metcalf, JSN. The way JSN has been playing versus the way DK Metcalf has been playing since he's come back, you have to favor JSN mightily. For DK Metcalf, to put it simply, 9.8 PPR points per game, not going to cut it. Sure, he's got the peripherals, 41% air yard share, 22% target share. We just need him to play better. And again, maybe that is this week. Maybe this is the squeaky wheel game. Obviously, Geno Smith, full practice after that knee injury scare he suffered last week. And I do think this could potentially be a bounce back spot for DK Metcalf. But when you're asking me right now, who do I trust in my lineup going into this fantasy football semifinal? There's 30 guys I prefer over DK Metcalf. Again, this could bite me in the butt. He does have that 20-plus PPR point spike week upside. But, as we see since he's returned, best game, 14 PPR points. All those other games, 9.9, 10.6, 8.9, 5.8. DK Metcalf has the ability to play better. We just need to see it on the field. But coming in at wide receivers 32 and 35 respectively, we have Adam Thielen of the Carolina Panthers, and we have Marvin Harrison Jr. of the Arizona Cardinals. I'll start off with Adam Thielen. Again, he has been a target machine since returning for Carolina, and he has 28 targets in his last 3 games. Arizona won't have near the same pass rush that we saw from the Cowboys last week, and Bryce Young trusts Adam Thielen. That's really what it comes down to. Adam Thielen, does he have the sexiest name? Does he have the highest upside in the world? Absolutely not. But if you're in a PPR league and you can soak up the level of targets that Adam Thielen does, you deserve a spot in the top 35 of these rankings. And very well, I expect him to finish probably even higher than this. I just think there's some other names with higher upside than Thielen this week, especially going up against a tough matchup that is the Arizona secondary, a bottom 5 matchup for wide receivers this year. And with Marvin Harrison Jr., again, I want to be ranking him higher like a DK Metcalf, but to put it simply, I don't trust him over the 34 names I have ahead of him. With Marvin Harrison Jr., he has been volatile. He hasn't really looked like that prospect that I thought he'd be coming out of the draft. And really, again, Carolina, good matchup for him on the outside. I get that. But at the same time, they are a run funnel defense. And James Conner is a guy I have ranked as a top 6 running back this week. I could see a scenario. Again, Kyler Murray's been struggling. Marvin Harrison not looking like that stud he was drafted to be. And James Conner gets going in this game script. Yes, 25.75 implied Cardinals points. But I got to see more from this passing offense to rank Marv higher. Wide receiver 33 for me this week, though, is Khalil Shakir of the Buffalo Bills, 30.25 implied Bills points. And I'm hesitant to completely vault Shakir up because I do think we could see some more Amari Cooper, some more Keon Coleman as they continue to get healthier from that wrist injury. However, Khalil Shakir has been nails all year. 13.3 PPR points per game, tethered to Josh Allen, highest implied team total of the week at 30.25. And we have seen him realize some touchdown equity as of late, 2 touchdowns in his last 2 games, and he does avoid Christian Gonzalez's shadow matchup playing in that slot wide receiver role. No issues with Khalil Shakir. In fact, I do think, like I said, he could potentially see a higher ceiling moving forward. He, to me, though, screams as a high floor, steady option like a Jacoby Myers. I just prefer Jacoby Myers. Next up at wide receiver 34, we have Darnell Mooney of the Atlanta Falcons, 25.25 implied Falcons points, hosting the New York Giants this week. And I think Darnell Mooney is the biggest beneficiary of that Falcons quarterback change. With Kirk Cousins playing the way he has been, obviously we've seen from Darnell Mooney big-time struggles, coming off a 0-point goose egg that he had on Monday Night Football. However, as this tweet from Dataroma suggests, we could see some more play-action vertical shots, which is the benefit of Darnell Mooney's game. As we do see here with the Giants matchup, they are allowing the highest completion percentage in the NFL on those deep targets, as well as the highest catchable throw rate, and the second most total completions of 20-plus yards down the field. As you know, with Michael Penix coming out of Washington, with Rome Odunze, with Jalen Polk, with Jalen McMillan, we saw a big-time vertical passing game for that Washington offense, and I do think that is where Michael Penix Jr. is most comfortable, especially in an exploitable spot going up against New York. And then finally, closing off this video at wide receiver 36, we have Josh Downs of the Indianapolis Colts, 23 implied Colts points, hosting the Tennessee Titans this week. And he returned to action last week. While it wasn't a big box score, we did see 8 targets in that game, and he has averaged over 13 PPR points per game this year when he's been on the field. The projection is a bit cloudy given the matchup and given Richardson's volatile play. However, Downs looks healthy, and when he has been healthy, he has operated as this team's wide receiver 1. I'm trusting a good player in a good spot to get me through to the fantasy football finals. But either way, if you guys enjoyed, make sure you leave a like down below, comment your biggest start sit decision. I'll try to get to as many as possible. And of course, if you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. We are currently, as I'm recording this, 15 subscribers off of 60,000. Again, truly appreciate you guys for the continued support you have shown for us over at the Fantasy Stock Exchange. Myself and Corey are truly appreciative. Again, we're nearing on the 5-year anniversary of the Fantasy Stock Exchange. I mean, it's crazy to think I'm about to be 25 years old in March, and we started this channel back when I was in college, back when I was 20, obviously Corey 22 at the time. So again, truly appreciate you guys for making this a full-time living for both of us. But again, hopefully you guys enjoyed. Like I said, more comments down below. Just want to give you guys the appreciation that you guys deserve. Peace out. Good luck in those semifinal matchups.